evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Now, many podcasts put the promotion and cup rattling stuff halfway through or even towards the end. It's how we generally get told to do the slightly uncomfortable business of asking for help. But because if all goes well, you're going to be asleep long before we get there, I need to put this stuff up front. The show is brought to you as always by the supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from more people all the time how valuable they find the show, and those supporters who have the means to help fund it, to keep it going and help me to reach new audiences, are very much appreciated. So if you're making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you deal with sleeplessness, and you have the urge to support the show, and most importantly, if you have the means, please check out patreon.com/sleepytimetales, or take a look at the link in the show notes or go from the website. You will of course have the satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to the rest and lifestyle improvements of thousands of people every month. And over and above that, there are real rewards available from as little as $2 a month. From early release of the weekly episodes to weekly bonus episodes and special edits of the main show. One thing as well, post offices are opening up soon, and I owe a lot of $5 patrons postcards, so I'm going to start sending those out. People have been waiting very patiently for those since before the lockdown started. And that's something that's still available. If you sign up at $5, I'll send you a nice touristy postcard from Durban, South Africa. Something fun and funny to get in the mail. So if you're interested and would like to take a look, hit patreon.com/sleepytimetales and see what's there. But of course, supporting something on a monthly basis may be a little bit much, especially in these tough times. So if you want to support in other ways, you can throw something in the tip jar. There's the merchandise store and others. In fact, recently I got a contribution in the tip jar from Brittany. Thank you very much, Brittany, for your support. It is, of course, I'm very grateful for it. And I got quite a nice review recently up on Apple Podcasts. A very short and sweet one. Wish me luck, 5 stars. I just started the latest episode and I'm already in love with his voice. Thanks very much for that. It's 12:13 a.m. and I'm still awake, and I literally just found this and I'm trying. Wish me luck. That's from Starlight Book Lover. Starlight Book Lover, I hope that worked out. Let me know and see that it worked for you. I'm hoping for the best, obviously. Thank you for taking the time to share some kind words. And then, of course, there's the reviews. And other than financial help, another thing you can do as well is just simply spread the word. If you listen to the show and you find it helpful and there is someone else in your life who you think will benefit from listening, just let them know. Tell them about it in person, or if you do it on social media, make sure to tag me in so that I know and I can thank you. You can tag me at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter, and I'll give you a little shout out for that as well. And of course, last but not least, is I have to shout out the music. The song is Un Désert by Kumiko, which is from Loyalty Freak Music. Their music is available on their own website, loyaltyfreakmusic.com, which you will find linked in the show notes. And they've got some very cool stuff available, and they actually release under different names. It's one person releases under different names and different styles depending on the sort of vibe they're going for. Very cool stuff to listen to, and also potentially good stuff to use if you have creative projects yourself. Most of it's under Creative Commons, free to use, and as I say, there's something there for everybody because they're a very prolific creator. So go take a look. And I think that's enough of that. Thank you for taking the time, and back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It does seem a bit of a strange idea after all, a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But in this 21st century, the lack of sleep is something like a health crisis. And this is a podcast of a sort that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself just not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to be a bother to them anymore, sleep really was always a struggle for me. Now, over the years, I tried various things to help, and a lot of people I knew liked sleeping with the TV or the radio on, but I resisted both of these things, thinking that I would sleep better with silence. It was much later when I discovered the tendency when I tried listening to podcasts at night, that the droning voices that were particular to podcasts actually did have a tendency to act like a sedative for me. A TV would have light that would disturb my sleep, or the radio would have music that I was either interested in or would irritate me, or much louder ads. So those things disturbed my attempt to sleep, whereas a podcast has a sort of consistent volume through the whole thing that made it a lot more soporific for me. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It usually runs about 15 or so minutes, and it's here for a couple of important reasons. Firstly, if you're new to the show, you may need me to explain to you what the point is, which is something I've already been doing, and also something I'm going to get to, which is how I think it's helpful for you to engage with the show. But for people who've been listening to it for a while, it also serves a very important purpose. For people who've been listening to the show for a while, they often don't even reach the story by the time it happens, because this whole intro is it's part of the process. It's almost like a meditation thing. What we're trying to do here is build a space together, something for you to sleep in, somewhere comfortable and inviting. And this is the part where you, as the listener, once you over the resistance of listening to this show and over the idea of the strangeness of it, this is where you and I together build the space, prepare a space to sleep. This is where you basically get your mindset ready for it. Now, for newer listeners, as far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with this show. For me, and I think a lot of others who engage with this podcast or other sleep podcasts like it, what a lot of people need is actually something to listen to, some kind of story or something to engage the mind with, to keep your mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of sleep when it comes for you. For a lot of people, it's maybe something a little bit more primal. White noise is a big thing these days. People like just literally the sound of white noise, or the sound of rain, or the ocean, or the wind in the trees. Or maybe you're one of those people that just needs a boring dude droning on in the background, and if that's what you need, I'm your man. Tonight's story, we return to pick up a story we haven't listened to in quite a long time. It's a Deephaven by Sarah Orne Jewett. It's a story of two young girls who go to the house of one of the young girls when her aunt passes away, and they start meeting with some locals and interesting people. And it's a rather cute story about these young women having a low-key adventures, and tonight's one they meet an elderly neighbor who's been taken care of by the aunt that has passed away. It's a cute little story, but not overly fascinating, and I think it's a really good candidate for helping you to get a good night's sleep without too many distractions. But the important thing, whatever the story is, of course, is that you don't fall asleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you when it's ready and when you're ready. Now, obviously, if all goes well, I'm hoping you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode. But it's also very important you don't feel pressurized. Especially if this is your first night, it actually probably won't work for you. I'd say give it a solid 2, preferably 3 nights to give it a try. See if my voice hits that point in you and the stories and the way I tell them hits that for you and helps you to sleep. There are a lot of people who do enjoy how I tell the stories, and there's some people who just don't, and that's fine. There's other options out there for you. And also, it's also possible that one episode just isn't long enough. What I usually do, because now also these days, it's not so much this going to sleep that's a struggle for me. What happens to me in the last couple of years is I actually wake up at like 3 a.m. and I can't get back to sleep. So what I do with my sleep podcast is I queue up a few. I download a bunch, and then I start with the latest one, and then I let them run through the night. And then when I wake up at 3 a.m., as inevitably happens, I just pop my earbuds back in and I waft back to sleep again. Sometimes even if the sun is coming up and it's 30 or 60 minutes before my alarm, I'll do the same. Wake up just before the alarm, pop the earbuds in, and go back to sleep again. And while it may seem a bit strange to go through the effort of going to sleep when you only have 30 minutes left to go, I've got to tell you that sometimes that is absolutely the best part of my night. There's something about just allowing yourself to relax completely right before the alarm that is satisfying and on a whole new level, deep level. But whether you're listening to the show when you're trying to get to sleep or having woken up in the middle of the night or to try and go that extra 40 winks just before it's time to get up, it's very important that you relax into this whole thing. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, it probably will seem strange for you. So I humbly request that you just give it a chance. And so you have the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way, or honestly, I'm not sure that it is so small. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes life harder, so I'm here to do a small part to help you in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And most importantly, I need you to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep, and the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling that we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep and to a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it's not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life and progress and technology that shines bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me. except maybe in a dream. This week we return to Deephaven and selected stories and sketches by Sarah Orne Jewett. My Lady Brandon and the Widow Jim. When it was known that we had arrived in Deephaven, the people who had known Miss Brandon so well, and Mrs. Lancaster also, seemed to consider themselves Kate's friends by inheritance, and were exceedingly polite to us, in either calling upon us or sending pleasant messages. Before the first week had ended, we had no lack of society. They were not strangers to Kate to begin with, and as for me, I think it is easy for me to be contented and to feel at home anyway. I have the good fortune and the misfortune to belong to the Navy. That is, my father does, and my life has been consequently an unsettled one, except during the years of my school life, when my friendship with Kate began. I think I should be happy in any town if I were living there with Kate Lancaster. I will not praise my friend as I can praise her, or say half the things I might say honestly. She is so fresh and good and true, and enjoys life so heartily. She is so childlike without being childish, and I do not tell you that she is faultless, but when she makes a mistake, she is sorrier and more ready to hopefully try again than any girl I know. Perhaps you would like to know something about us, but I am not writing Kate's biography and my own, only telling you of one summer which we spent together. Sometimes in Deephaven we were between 6 and 7 years old, but at other times we have felt irreparably grown up, and as if we carried a crushing weight of care and duty. In reality, we are both 24, and it is a pleasant age, though I think next year is sure to be pleasanter, for we do not mind growing older since we have lost nothing that we mourn about, and are gaining so much. I shall be glad if you learn to know Kate a little in my stories. It is not that I am fond of her and endow her with imagined virtues and graces. No one can fail to see how unaffected she is, or not notice her thoughtfulness and generosity, and her delightful fun, which never has a trace of coarseness or silliness. It was very pleasant having her for one's companion, for she has the unusual power of winning people's confidence, and of knowing with surest instinct how to meet them on their own ground. It is the girls being so genuinely sympathetic and interested which makes everyone ready to talk to her and be friends with her, just as the sunshine makes it easy for flowers to grow which the chilly winds hinder. She is not polite for the sake of seeming polite, but polite for the sake of being kind, and there is not a particle of what Hugh Miller justly calls the insolence of condescension about her. She is not brilliantly talented, yet she does everything in such a charming fashion of her own. She is not profoundly learned, yet she knows much of which many wise people are ignorant, and while she is a patient scholar in both little things and great, she is no less a teacher to all her friends. Dear Kate Lancaster. We knew that we were considered Miss Brandon's representatives in Deephaven society, and this was no slight responsibility, as she had received much honor and respect. We heard again and again what a loss she had been to the town, and we tried that summer to do nothing to lessen the family reputation, and to give pleasure as well as take it, though we were singularly persistent in our pursuit of a good time. I grew much interested in what I heard of Miss Brandon, and it seems to me that it is a great privilege to have an elderly person in one's neighborhood, in town or country, who is proud and conservative and who lives in stately fashion, who is intolerant of sham and of useless novelties, and clings to the old ways of living and behaving as if it were part of a religion. There is something immensely respectable about the gentlewomen of the old school. They ignore all bustle and flashiness, and the conceit of the younger people, who act as if at last it had been for them to appear, and manage this world as it ought to have been managed before. Their position in modern society is much like that of the King's Chapel in its busy street in Boston, It perhaps might not have been easy to approach Miss Brandon, but I'm sure that if I had visited Deephaven during her lifetime, I should have been very proud if I'd been asked to take tea at her house, and should have liked to speak afterward of my acquaintance with her. It would have been impossible not to pay her great deference. It is a pleasure to think she might have found this place a most polite world, and have had the highest opinion of its good manners. Noblesse oblige. That is true in more ways than one. I cannot help wondering if those of us who will be left by and by to represent our own generation will seem to have such superior elegance of behaviour, if we shall receive so much respect and be so much valued. It is hard to imagine it. We know that the world gains new refinements and a better culture, but to us there never will be such imposing ladies and gentlemen as those who belong to the old school. The morning after we reached Deephaven, we were busy upstairs, and there was a determined blow at the knocker of the front door. I went down to see who was there, and had the pleasure of receiving our first caller. She was a prim little old woman who looked pleased and expectant, who wore a neat cap in front and whose eyes were as bright as black beads. She wore no bonnet and had thrown a little three-cornered shawl with palm leaf figures over her shoulders, and it was evident that she was a near neighbour. She was very short and straight and thin, and so quick that she darted like a pickerel when she moved about. It occurred to me at once that she was a very capable person, and had faculty, and dear me how fast she talked. She hesitated a moment when she saw me, and dropped a fragment of a courtesy. "Miss Lancaster?" said she doubtfully. "No," said I. "I'm Miss Denise. Miss Lancaster's at home, though. Come in, won't you?" "Oh, Mrs. Patton," said Kate, who had come down just then. "How very kind of you to come over so soon. I should have gone to see you today. I was asking Mrs. Q last night if you were here." "Land o' compassion," said Mrs. Patton as she shook Kate's hand delightedly. "Where'd you suppose I be, dear? I ain't like to move away from Deephaven now, after I've been held by the place so long. I've got as many roots as the big elm. Well, I should know you were Brandon, no matter where I to see you. You've got a real Brandon look. Tall and straight, ain't you? It's been 4 or 5 years since I saw you, except once at church, and once you went by down to the shore, I suppose. It was a windy day in the spring of the year." "I remember it very well," said Kate. "They were both visits of only a day or two, and I was here at Aunt Catherine's funeral and went away that same evening. Do you remember once I was here in the summer for a longer visit, 5 or 6 years ago, and I helped you pick currants in the garden? You had a very old mug." "Now, who would have thought of you recollecting that?" said Mrs. Patton. "Yes, I had that mug, because it was handy to carry about among the bushes, and I'd empty it into the basket as fast as I got it full. Your aunt always told me to pick all I wanted. She couldn't use them, but they used to make sights of currant wine in old times. I suppose that mug would be considerable of a curiosity to anyone who wasn't used to seeing it around. My grandfather, Joseph Toggerson, my mother was a Toggerson, picked it up on the long sands in a wad of seaweed. Strange it wasn't broke, but it's tough. I've dropped it on the floor many's the time, and it ain't even chipped. There's some Dutch reading on it, and it's marked 1732. Now, I shouldn't have thought you'd remember that old mug, I declare. Your aunt, she had a monstrous sight of shinny. She's told me where it most of all comes from, but I expect I forgot. My memory fails me a good deal by spells. If you hadn't come down, I suppose your mother would have had the chinny packed up this spring. What she didn't take with her after your aunt died. Suppose she hasn't made up her mind what to do with the house." "No," said Kate. "She wishes she could. It's a great puzzle to us." "I hope you'll find it in middling order," said Mrs. Patton humbly. "Me and Miss Dockham have done the best we knew, opened the windows and let in the air and tried to keep it from getting damp. I fixed all the woolens with fresh campfire and tobacco the last of the winter. You have to be dreadful careful in one of these old houses, lest everything gets creaking with moths in no time. Miss Catherine, how she did hate the sight of a moth miller. There's something I'll speak about before I forget it. The mice have eaten the backs of a pile of old books that's stored away in the west chamber, closet next to Miss Catherine's room, and I set a trap there. But it was older than the 10 Commandments, that trap was, and the spring's rusty. I guess you better get some new ones and sit round in different places, lest the mice will pester you. There ain't been no chance for 'em to get much of a living long round the winter, but they'll be sure to come back quick as they find there's likely to be good board. I see your aunt's cat sitting out on the front steps. She never was no great of a mouser, but it went to my heart to see how pleased she looks. Come right back, didn't she? How they do hold to their old haunts. Was that Miss Brandon's cat? I asked, with great interest. She's been upstairs with us, but I suppose she belonged to some neighbour and had strayed in. She behaved as she felt at home, poor old pussy. We must keep her here, said Kate. Miss Dockham took after your mother went off, and Miss Catherine's maids, said Mrs. Patton. But she told me there was a long spell before she seemed to feel contented. She used to sit on the steps and cry by the hour together and try to get in, to first one door and then another. I used to think how bad Miss Catherine would feel. She said a great deal by a cat, and she took notice of this as long as she did of anything. Her mind failed her, you know. Great loss to Deephaven she was. Proud woman, and some folks were scared of her, but always got along with her, and I wouldn't ask for no kinder friend nor neighbour. I've had my troubles, and I've seen the day I was suffering poor, and I couldn't have brought myself to ask town help nohow. But I wish you'd have heard her scold me when she found it out. And she came marching to my kitchen one morning like a grenadier, and says she, "Why didn't you send and tell me how sick and poor you are?" she says. And she said she'd have been so glad to help me all along, but she thought I had means. Everybody did. And I see the tears in her eyes, but she was scolding me and speaking as if she was dreadful mad. She made me comfortable, and she sent me over one of her maids to see to me, and got the doctor and a load of stuff to come up from the store, so I didn't have to buy anything for a good many weeks. I got better, and so's to work, but she'd never let me say anything about it. I had a good deal of trouble when I thought I'd lost my health, but I hadn't, and that was 30 or 40 years ago. There never was nothing going on at the great house that she didn't have me over, sewing or cleaning or company, and it got so that I knew how she liked to have things done. I felt as if it was my own sister, though I never had one. When I was going over to help lay her out, she used to talk as free to me as she would to Miss Lorham or Miss Carew. I suppose you ain't seen nothing of them yet. She was a good Christian woman, Miss Catherine was. The memory of the just is blessed. That's what Mr. Lorimer said in his sermon on the Sunday after she died. And there wasn't a blood relation there to hear it. I declare it looked pitiful to see that pew empty that ought to have been in the mourner's pew. Your mother, Miss Lancaster, had to go home Saturday. Your father was coming away sudden to Washington, I've understood. And she came back again the first of the week. There, it didn't make no sort of difference. Perhaps no one thought of it but me. There hadn't been anybody in the pew more than a couple of times since she used to sit there herself, regular as Sunday come. And Mrs. Patton looked for a minute as if she were going to cry, but she changed her mind upon second thought. Your mother gave me most of Miss Catherine's clothes. This cap belonged to her. I've got on now, it's almost wore out, but it does for mornings. Oh, said Kate, I have 2 new ones for you in one of my trunks. Mamma meant to choose them herself, but she had not the time, so she told me, and I think I found the kind she thought she would like. Now I'm sure, said Mrs. Patton, if that ain't kind. You don't tell me that Miss Lancaster thought of me just as she was going off. I shall set everything by them caps, and I'm much obliged to you too, Miss Kate. I was just going to speak of that time you were here and saw the mug. You trimmed a cap for Miss Catherine to give me real Boston style. I guess that box of cap fixings is up on the top shelf of Miss Catherine's closet now, to the left hand, said Mrs. Patton, with wistful certainty. She used to make her everyday caps by herself, and she had some beautiful materials laid away that she never used. Some folks has laughed at me for being so particular about wearing caps except for the best. But I don't know it's presuming beyond my station, and somehow I feel more respect for myself when I have a good cap on. I can't get over your mother's recollecting about me. And she sent me a handsome present of money this spring for looking after the house. I should never have asked for a cent. It's a pleasure to me to keep an eye on it, out of respect to your aunt. I was so pleased when I heard you were coming along with your friend. I like to see the old place open. It was about as bad as having no meeting. I miss seeing the lights, and your aunt was a great hand for lighting up bright. The big hall lantern was lit every night, and she put it out when she went upstairs. She liked to go around same as if it was day. You see, I forget all the time she was sick and go back to the days when she was well and about the house. When her mind was failing her and she was upstairs in her room, her eyesight seemed to be lost part of the time, and sometimes she'd tell us to get the lamp and a couple of candles in the middle of the day, and then she'd be as satisfied. But she used to take a notion to sit in the dark some nights, and I suppose, I should have 40 fits if I undertook it. There was a good while ago, and do you recollect how she used to play the piano? She used to be a great hand to play when she was young. Indeed, I remember it, said Kate, who told me afterwards how her aunt used to sit at the piano in the twilight and play to herself. She was formerly a skillful musician, said my friend, though one would not have imagined she cared for music. When I was a child, she used to play in company of an evening, and once when I was here, one of her old friends asked for a tune, and she laughingly said that her day was over and her fingers were stiff, though I believe she may have played as well as ever then if she had cared to try. But once in a while, when she had been quiet all day and rather sad, I am ashamed that I used to think she was cross. She would open the piano and sit there until late, while I used to be enchanted by her memories of dancing tunes and old psalms and marches and songs. There was one tune which I'm sure she had a history. There was a sweet, wild cadence in it, and she would come back to it again and again, always going through it with the same measured way. I have remembered so many things about my aunt since I've been here, said Kate, which I hardly noticed and did not understand when they happened. I was afraid of her when I was a little girl, but I think if I had grown up sooner, I should have enjoyed her heartily. It never used to occur to me that she had a spark of tenderness or of sentiment until just before she was ill, and I've been growing more fond of her ever since. It might have given her a great deal more pleasure. It was not long after I was through school that she became so feeble. And of course she liked best having Mama come to see her. One of us had to be at home. I've thought lately how careful one ought to be kind and thoughtful to one's old friends. It is so soon too late to be good to them, and then one is always so sorry. I must tell you more of Mrs. Patton. Of course, it was not long before we returned her call, and we were much entertained. We always liked to see our friends in their own houses. Her house was a little way down the road, unpainted and gambrel-roofed, but so low that the old lilac bushes which clustered around it were tall as the eaves. The widow Jim, as nearly everyone called her in distinction to the widow Jack Patton, who was a tailoress and lived at the other end of town, was a very useful person. I suppose there must be a counterpart in all old New England villages. She sewed and she made elaborate rugs, and she had a decided talent for making carpets, if there was one to be made, which must have happened seldom. But there were a great many to be turned and made over in Deephaven, and she went to the Carews and Lorimers at house-cleaning time, or in seasons of great festivity. She had no equal in sickness and knew how to brew every old-fashioned dose and to make every variety of herb tea. And when her nursing was put to an end by her patient's death, she was commander-in-chief at the funeral and stood near the doorway to direct the mourning friends to their seats. And I have no reason to doubt that she sometimes even had the immense responsibility of making out the order of the procession, since she had all genealogy and relationship at her tongue's end. It was an awful thing in Deephaven, we found, if the precedence was wrongly assigned, and once we chanced to hear some bitter remarks because the cousins of the departed wife had been placed after the husband's relatives. The blood relations right in behind them that was only kin by marriage? I don't wonder they felt hurt, said the person who spoke, a most unselfish and unassuming soul ordinarily. Mrs. Patton knew everybody's secrets, but she told them judiciously, if at all. She chatted all day to you as a sparrow twitters, and you did not tire of her, and Kate and I were never more agreeably entertained than when she told us of old times, and of Kate's ancestors and their contemporaries, for her memory was wonderful, and she had either seen everything that had happened in Deephaven for a long time, or had received the particulars from reliable witnesses. She had known much trouble. Her husband had been but a small satisfaction to her, and it was not to be wondered at if she looked upon all proposed marriages with compassion. She was always early at church, and she wore the same bonnet that she had when Kate was a child. It was such a well-preserved, proper black straw bonnet, with discreet bows of ribbon and a useful lace veil to protect it from the weather. She showed us into the best room the first time we went to see her. It was the plainest little room and very dull, and there was an exact sufficiency about its furnishings. Yet there was a certain dignity about it, and it was unmistakably a best room, and not a place where one might make a litter or carry one's everyday work. You felt at once that somebody valued the prim old-fashioned chairs and the 2 half-moon tables, and the thin carpet, which must have needed anxious stretching every spring to make it come to the edge of the floor. There were some mourning pieces by the way of decoration, inscribed with the name of Mrs. Patton's departed friends. 2 worked in crewel to the memory of her father and mother, and 2 paper memorials, with the woman weeping under the willow at the side of a monument. They were all brown with age, and there was a sampler beside, worked by Judith Beckett, aged 10, and all 5 were framed in slender black frames and hung very high on the walls. There was a rocking chair which looked as if it felt too grand for use, and considered itself imposing. It tilted far back on its rockers and was bent forward to the top to make one's head uncomfortable. It need not have troubled itself. Nobody would ever wish to sit there. It was such a big rocking chair, and Mrs. Patton was proud of it, always generously urging her guests to enjoy its comfort, which was imaginary with her, as she was so short that she could hardly have climbed to it without assistance. Mrs. Patton was a little ceremonious at first, but soon recovered herself and told us a great deal which we were glad to hear. I asked her once if she had not always lived in Deephaven. Here and beyond East Parish, said she. Mr. Patton, that was my husband, he owned a good farm there when I married him. But I came back here again after he died. Place was all mortgaged, I never got a cent, and was poorer than when I started. I worked harder than ever I did before or since to keep things together, but it wasn't any kind of use. Your mother knows all about it, Miss Kate, as if we might not be willing to believe it on her authority. I come back here a widow and destitute, and I tell you the world looked fair to me when I left this house first to go over there. Don't you run no risks, you better off as you be, dears. But land sakes alive, he didn't mean no hurt, and he set everything by me when he was himself. I don't make no scruples of speaking about it. Everybody knows how it was, but I did go through with everything. I never knew what the day would bring forth, said the widow, as if this was the first time she had a chance to tell her sorrows to a sympathizing audience. She did not seem to mind talking about the troubles of her married life, any more than a soldier minds telling of the story of his campaigns and dwells with pride on the worst battle of all. Her favourite subject always was Miss Brandon, and after a pause she said that she hoped we were finding everything right in the house. She had meant to take up the carpet in the best spare room, but it didn't seem to need it. It was taken up the year before, and the room had not been used since. There was not a mite of dust under it last time. And Kate assured her, with the appearance of great wisdom, that she did not think it could be necessary at all. I come home and I had a good cry yesterday after I was over to see you, said Mrs. Patton. And I could not help wondering if she really could cry, for she looked so perfectly dried up, so dry that she might rustle in the wind. Your aunt had been failing so long that just after she died it was a relief. But I've got so as to forget all about that, and I miss her as she used to be. It seemed as if you had stepped into her place and you looked some as she used to when she was young. You must miss her, said Kate, and I know how much she used to depend on you. You were very kind to her. I sat up with her the night she died, said the widow, with mournful satisfaction. I've lived neighbour to her all my life except the 13 years I was married. And there wasn't a week I wasn't over to the great house, except I was off to a distance taking care of the sick. When she got to be feeble, she always wanted me to tend to the cleaning and to see to putting the canopies and curtains on the bedsteads, and she wouldn't trust nobody but me to handle some of the best china. I used to say, Miss Catherine, why don't you have some young folks come and stop with you? There's Miss Lancaster's daughter growing up, but she didn't seem to care for nobody but your mother. You wouldn't be believing what a hand she used to be for company in her younger days. Surprising how folks alters. When I first recollect how much she was straight as an arrow, and she used to go to Boston visiting and come home with the top of the fashion. She always did dress elegant. It used to be gay here, and she was always going down to the Lorimers or to the Carews to tea, and they come in here. Her sister was married. She was a good deal older, but some of her brothers were at home. There was your grandfather and Mr. Henry. I don't think she ever got it over, his disappearing so. There were lots of folks then that's dead and gone. And they used to have their card parties, and old Captain Manning, he's dead and gone. Used to have 'em all to play whist every fortnight, sometimes 3 or 4 tables, and they always had cake and wine handed round, and the captain made some punch, like snot with oranges in it, and lemons, he knew how. He was a bachelor to the end of his days, the old captain was, but he used to entertain real handsome. I recollect one night there was playing after the wine was brought in, and he upset his glass all over Miss Martha Lorimer's invisible green-watered silk, and spoiled the better part of 2 breaths. She sent right over for me early the next morning to see if I knew of anything to take out the spots, but I didn't, though it can take grease out almost any material. We tried clear alcohol and saleratus water and hartshorn and pouring water through and heating of it, and when we got through it was worse than when we started. She felt dreadful bad about it, and at last she says, Judith, we won't work over it any more, but if you'll give me a day sometime or another, we'll rip it up and make a quilt of it. I see that quilt last time I was in Miss Rebecca's north chamber. Miss Martha was her aunt. You never saw her. She was dead and gone before your day. It was a silk old Captain Peter Lorimer. Her brother had left him his money brought home from sea, and she had worn it for best and second best 11 years. It looked as good as new, and she never would have ripped it up if she could have matched it. I said it seemed to be a shame, but it was a Curie's figure. Captain Manning fetched her one to pay for it the next time he went to Boston. She didn't want to take it, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He was free-handed, the captain was. I helped him make it long of Mary Sims, the dressmaker. She's dead and gone too. The time it was made, it was brown and a beautiful-looking piece, but it wore shiny, and she made a double gown of it before she died. Mrs. Patton brought Kate and me some old-fashioned cake with much spice in it, and told us it was made by old Mrs. Chantry Brandon's receipt, which she got in England, that it would keep a year, and she always kept a loaf by her, now that she could afford it. She supposed we knew Miss Catherine had named her in her will long before she was sick. It has put me beyond fear of want, said Mrs. Patton. I won't deny that I used to think it'd go hard with me when I got so old I couldn't earn my living. You see, I never laid up but a little, and it's hard for a woman who comes of respectable folks to be a pauper in her last days. But your aunt, Miss Kate, she thought of it too, and I'm sure I'm thankful to be so comfortable and to stay in my house, which I couldn't have done, like's not. Miss Rebecca Lorimer said to me after I got news of the will, "Why, Miss Patton? You don't suppose to be your friends would ever let you want?" And I says, "My friends are kind, the Lord bless 'em, but I feel better to be able to do for myself than to be beholden." After this long call, we went down to the post office and, coming home, stopped for a while in the old burying ground, which we had noticed the day before. And we sat for the first time on the great stone in the wall in the shade of a maple tree, where we so often waited afterward for the stage to come with the mail, or rested on our way home from a walk. It was a comfortable perch. We used to read our letters there, I remember. I must tell you a little about the Deephaven burying ground, for its interest was inexhaustible, and I do not know how much time we may have spent in reading the long epitaphs on the gravestones and trying to puzzle out the inscriptions, which were often so old and worn that we could only trace a letter here and there. It was a neglected corner of the world, and there were straggling sumacs and acacias scattered about the enclosure, while a row of fine old elms marked the boundary of two sides. The grass was long and tangled, and most of the stones leaned one way or the other, and some had fallen flat. There were a few handsome old family monuments clustered in one corner, among which the one that marked Mrs. Brandon's grave looked so new and fresh that it seemed inappropriate. "It should have been dingy to begin with, like the rest," said Kate one day, "but I think it will make itself look like its neighbours as soon as possible." There were many stones which were sacred to the memory of men who had been lost at sea, and almost always giving the name of the departed ship, which was so kept in remembrance. And one felt as much interest in the ship Starlight, supposed to have founded off the Cape of Good Hope, as in the poor fellow who had the ill luck to be one of her crew. There were dozens of such inscriptions, and there were other stones perpetuating the fame of honourable gentlemen who had been members of His Majesty's Council, or surveyors of His Majesty's Woods, or King's Officers of Customs for the town of Deephaven. Some of the epitaphs were beautiful, showing that tenderness for the friends who had died, that longing to do them justice, to fully acknowledge their virtues and dearness, which is so touching and so unmistakable even under the stiff, quaint expressions and formal words which are thought suitable to be chiselled on the stones, so soon to be looked at carelessly by the tearless eyes of strangers. We often used to notice names and learn their history from the old people whom we knew, and in this way we heard many stories which we shall never forget. It is wonderful, the romance and tragedy and adventure which one may find in quiet, old-fashioned country town. Though to heartily enjoy everyday life, one must care to study life and character, and must find pleasure in thought and observation of simple things, and have an instinctive, delicious interest in what to other eyes is unflavoured dullness. To go back to Mrs. Patton, on our way home after our first call upon her, we stopped to speak to Mrs. Dockham, who mentioned that she had seen us going to Widow Jim's. "Willing woman," said Mrs. Dockham, "always been respected. Got an uncommon facility of speech. I never saw such a hand to talk, but then she had something to say, which ain't the case with everybody. Good neighbour, does according to her means always. Dreadful tough time of it with her husband, shiftless and drunk all his time. Noticed that dent in the side of her forehead, I suppose? That's where he liked to have killed her. Slung a stone bottle at her." "What?" said Kate and I, very much shocked. "She don't like to have it inquired about, but she and I were sitting up with Mandadama one night, and she gave me the particulars. I knew he did it, for she had a fit of sickness afterwards. Had sliced cucumbers for breakfast that morning. He was very partial to them, and he wanted some vinegar. Happened to be 2 bottles in the cellarway. They were just alike. One of them was vinegar, and the other had spirit in it at haying time. He takes up the wrong one and pours on quick, and out comes the hayseed and flies. And he gives the bottle a sling, and it hit her there where you see the scar. Might have put the end of your finger in the dent. He said he meant to break the bottle against the door, but it went slantwise, sort of. I don't know, I'm sure. She said he was good-natured. It was early in the morning, and he hadn't had time to get upset. But he had a high temper naturally, and so much drink hadn't made it much better. She had good prospects when she married him. 6'2" and red cheeks and straight as a Norway pine. Had a good property from his father and his mother come of a good family, but he died in debt, drank like a fish. Yes, it was a shame. Nice woman, good consistent church member, always been respected, useful among the sick. And I think I'm going to call it there for tonight. If you're interested in learning more about the people of Deephaven and the adventures of our protagonists, you can find it on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Deseo by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find links in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.